And by our willingness to just focus on transformation without recovery and not put those two processes together, we enable the addictive system. Does this make any sense to you now? Because this is where we're moving beyond science and beyond therapy, what we know as both. It's fascinating to me. Actually, my secretary read me a line the other day from this new book she was typing. You know, I really do feel inspired sometimes because I don't know where these lines come from. I read this book, Meditations for Women Who Do Too Much, or the new Laugh I Thought I'd Die. God, that's good. You know, where did that come from? I don't even remember writing it. And she read me something I said the other day that I don't remember writing at all. But I said there are two groups that are really coming to grips with this issue right now. And one is the theoretical physicists and scientists. You know, they are really looking at the implications of a mechanistic, empirical, reductionist worldview. What does that mean? They're really looking at it, you know? And the other people, but they're not doing anything, you know? The other people, I think, that are really doing something, but not looking at it, are the recovering addicts, you know, which is a worldwide movement of many millions of people. But they're not thinking about it. So what I said is, we're doing it and we're thinking about it, and that's what this book is about. Because I think that so much of what we have in some of the New Age stuff is trying to do some kind of transformation without having to face the problem. And we can't do that anymore. Now, the work that I'm doing now, it's taken it 20 years or so before I'm even willing to talk about it. Because it's been evolving. And it has not been something that came out of a theory. It's something that evolved as a way of being and working with people, and then I had to put a theory to it. And that's the way I've written this book. This book, the first section of the book, as I said, is the rise and demise of a psychotherapist. And it's my own story. What I've been through, who I trained with. You know, I trained with everybody. I trained with Fritz Perls, Virginia Satir, Carl Rogers, Maslow, J.L. Moreno, you know. And I know one of the reasons I did that was because I knew something was missing. There's nobody in the world who go to more workshops than psychotherapists. And I believe one of the reasons is because in our guts we know there's something not quite right, you know. It's sure true for me. And then I was good at it, but I knew there was something wrong with it. You know, so it's my own story of how it was really when I started my own recovery that I got the missing pieces that made sense. And to me, the key for recovery was that I shifted into a participatory system. I could not go to 12-step meetings and observe them. I had to do the program. And when I did the program, I moved. I shifted paradigms. In spite of myself. And believe me, I fought it. So it's like I got new glasses, you know, and I had to see the world in a different way. That's what happened. And so my work changed. And then I came to a point where I could no longer do psychotherapy. I could no longer have a private practice because I was no longer comfortable. And working with individuals didn't make any sense to me because it was the power of the group. I was too central as an individual psychotherapist. Now, it scared me shitless because that was my identity. You know, and that's how I supported my kids as a single parent. And even though I was making more money giving speeches and consulting and doing workshops, in my mind, the core of my income was from my psychotherapy practice and everything else was frosting on the cake. So to give that up took me 2 years. After I knew that it was time for me to do it. It took me 2 more years to quit. And now I see that I'm operating out of a very different model. And so then what happened is I have tried to articulate the model and the scientific worldview after the fact of having done it for many years. Now, what the addictive way of doing things is trying to decide the worldview and then girdle ourselves into it, you see. So it doesn't come out organically of our own living process and our own knowing and learning and making mistakes and dropping things and quit and giving them up, you see, which is what this work has come out of. Yes?
I'm really trying hard to understand it. You said what you said a second ago about you gave up your practice because you said something about the group and you being too central and I didn't get it.
Oh, well, that was just one thing I said. Her question was, when I said she's not getting it, that I said I gave up my practice and I said something about the group and being too central. What I realized is that part of what I think is wrong with psychotherapy is there's an expert who has the answers, who controls the situation, who knows what you need, who manipulates you one way or another, gently or not so gently, into what you need. What I know now is that in step by step trying to break that down, first of all I started doing more groups, because in the groups what's really important, I think the most important learning in groups is other people sharing their stories and what's going on with them. And see, I had been doing that in private therapy, which was totally unethical. I mean, when I look back at my unethicalness, it's a huge thing. But, for example, when I had two clients, private clients that were dealing with the same issues, I often thought that they could be more helpful to each other than I could be. And so I would give them each other's names and have them get in touch with each other. And it didn't mean that they wouldn't continue therapy. They might or might not, but they were more help than I could be. You know, just sharing with each other their stories and what they were doing and how they were going along. So what I began to see over time was that it was the listening to each other's stories and each other's, what people were coping with, where we really learn. And it wasn't, I didn't need to be the center of attention. I didn't need, with my wise interpretations and all my training and background, which I think was a detriment, you know, that wasn't where the real healing took place. The real healing was as we listened to each other. Occasionally I would jump in and say, now did you hear that? You know, or do you see the connection here? Or I would do some teaching, but only out of what was present, not out of what I thought was right or what people, you know, from my theory I thought people needed, or this meant that and that meant that. And then I started doing my own work in the groups, that I would share where I was, what was going on with me. If I had a deep process come up, I would hit the mats like anybody else, and one of them would facilitate me. And so it was a beginning of breaking down of that power kind of structure that has been inherent in psychotherapy, which I think is unhealthy and part of the, you know, the whole expert-client duality. And so what I know is that as I share my own struggle, and then we went through a period, I can remember that my ex-husband, when I first met him, one of the things I loved about him is he was so self-revealing, you know? I mean, he would, oh God, he would tell things that would just embarrass me to death, you know? But then one of the things, like he talked about, he grew up a Catholic, and one of the things I heard him tell in a workshop was how, you know, how as a little boy he couldn't keep his hands in his pockets because the nuns thought he was playing with himself, you know, and to this day when he sees a nun he would pull his hands out of his pocket, and you know, and I thought, that's really revealing, you know. Well, but the 16th time I heard him share it with a group, I thought, I'm not sure how much revealing that is. I call that Esalen honesty, you know, that we developed a kind of honesty that wasn't really honest, didn't really cost anything, but looked great, you know. And so I went through that period too. And then when I really came to is, you know, if I'm gonna do this work, I'm gonna share what costs me. I'm gonna just be working on my own stuff too. Well, of course that's frowned upon, because then why are people paying you if you're working on your stuff too? But of course, I think breaking that model is real important. So it's been a process. It's been a long process of continuing, and the thing I feel good about is I have continued what felt right to me. Even when my professional organization said this is unethical, when they said this is a dual relationship, or this is breaking down boundaries, or whatever. But step by step, if my own integrity felt that I needed to change something, then I've done it. And now what I've come up with is a way of working with people that is the most healing thing I have ever seen. And I have seen people heal from the most horrendously awful experiences that in my training I was taught they would just have to live with. And they would always be scarred. That's not true. It's not true. So it's been a step-by-step process. In the fall of '92. We have, by the way, 2 people who were in training with me for year-long training. Will you 2 just hold your hand up? Stand up. We do the intensives, and for people who want more of this experience, that is a year-long training program, we call it. If any of you are interested in talking to them, Ken has been to an intensive. Phyllis has been to an intensive. She's doing the training this coming year. Chris has been to several intensives. Any of you are interested in asking those people what they're like, it's probably better to ask them than me. Yes?
Do you think it's ethical for anyone to practice psychotherapy? Or other helping professionals that matter based on
I don't think it's ethical for most psychotherapists to practice psychotherapy. That's where I would start. I think that the training into the field trains out of us what is most healing.
So it would depend on what the individual psychotherapist's interpretation really is.
Not necessarily, because I think it's bigger than that. See, I think a lot of people say, well, my therapist is different. But I think that all of us need to look at the fact that we were trained to come out of a scientific worldview that is the same. And unless we go back that far, we can't really change. So for me, therapy has to go. Psychology as we know it has to go. Social work as we know it has to go. Because it's all part of a major paradigm shift. Medicine as we know it has to go. So it's all part of a major paradigm shift. I do not believe that it's possible for anybody to do good healing work if they aren't doing their own. I do not believe that at all. I think Freud knew that too. But he was a raging addict, Freud was, Many psychotherapists are raging addicts. If nothing else, they're relationship and codependent. Relationship addict and codependent. So I think we really need to take a look at this. That the very places we've gone to for healing have indeed exacerbated the issue on a mega level, even though it's helped. And that's what's been so misleading. And this is what Chris was talking about in medicine this morning. Even though it's initially helped, at another level, it keeps the problems going. Wouldn't you agree, Chris? Yes.
I just wanted to thank you for what you're doing and to say that I personally feel very affirmed. I've held off from going into psychotherapy. Feel although that my interest in working with people I think very much on the outside, and the deed here is very affirming. And I hope that these psychotherapists are not required to go through intensive.
Oh no, The training is to live. Yeah.
Just speak a little bit, just kind of give an overview of what somebody might get or look for if they were to participate in your intensive.
They're all different. And mostly what we do is check in. Yeah, talk to them. There's a lot of deep process work that goes on, and we have 12-step meetings. We start the day with 12-step meetings. People choose what meetings they want and go to what they want. They don't go if they don't want to. Most people say it's the most honest situation they've ever been in their whole life. We don't try to make it honest, we just are. And most people say it's the safest. I think it's the safest because it's honest. We're going to be doing more and more of them in Montana. We just bought an old 110-year-old hot springs hotel out there in a valley that the Indians called Peace Valley because they refused to fight with each other in that valley because it was so healing, the waters were so healing. So that's where we're going to be more and more. I used to do them all over the country, but I decided it's okay for people to come to me now. I'm getting older. And it's so healing. Yeah?
How is that hot springs hotel going?
Oh, it's going. We've got the bathhouse. This place is such a wonder. I've been doing trainings in Montana in the summer because Montana is one of my favorite states. It's one of the cleanest, healthiest states in the United States, I think. And there's just space in Montana. And I had lived there as a kid, and I loved it. And I was out there doing summer trainings and workshop intensives, and when that airline crash in Iowa, that flight from Denver to Chicago a few years ago, I am often on that plane. And it was like, okay, I get it, there's a sign. And I just said, I can't keep doing this anymore. I don't want to be flying around so much. And so I asked a realtor to look for me a place in Montana. And what I was going to do was buy a ranch and convert the barn and the bunkhouses to places where we could at least do intensives. And I figured with what we paid to rent a ski lodge for a month to do our intensives and training, it would pay for the mortgage, you know. And so that's how I started. And I enlisted everything I wanted. I thought, why not ask for it? You know, I wanted a hot springs. Put it first on my list, not expecting to get it. And I wanted a place that backed up to national forest land, and I wanted a place that had mountains and meadows, and I love streams, so I wanted a place with a stream and preferably a little lake, but you know, and a place that was at the end of the road so we wouldn't disturb other people, and private enough where we could do what we wanted. You know, I had this whole list of things, and she called me and she said, "Oh, well, I've got a place that I think meets all your criteria, but it's really big." And she said, "Do you know the old Boulder Hot Springs?" I said, "Yeah, I used to soak there when I was a kid." She said, "Well, it's for sale." And I almost bought it without even going looking at it, but I decided that I would get a lot of shit for that from people who are real organized. And so I went and looked at it, and it was dark, and it was a mess, and you know, I knew I was going to buy it. So I mobilized my resources, and we had to pay cash right away, and a lot of people were looking at it. So the only thing I didn't have on my list, well, there are two things that I got that I didn't have on my list. One was a condemned building, and the other was ghosts. And we got both. So at this point, the bathhouse is finished and licensed. The kitchen is finished and licensed, and we expect by June to have the first wing finished. So we're coming along. Then we have the old building still yet to do, and 274 acres that we need to do something with. It's a very healing place. It's just wonderful to be there. Even when it's a wreck, when the ceilings are falling, it's still wonderful to be there. So.
This is an extension of your house.
My house?
Your earlier house that you couldn't keep up with.
Oh, I keep thinking this is my mother's spirit, and this one, she loves to fix up all things, and I keep saying, "Mother, this is going too far." But no, I don't know. Friends of mine said that what I should get is a warehouse with a bedroom off the side, because I'm always collecting junk and things. So this is a great place. There's lots of room to collect things in it. But we need a place. We need a place to come to where people can come and go. And that's going to be there too. There will always be people there who are in recovery and who are trying to live in process. And it'll be a place where people can come and go from that. And then we'll have our intensives and our trainings. And see, we have training groups in New Zealand. We're just starting one in New Zealand. We're starting one in Australia. We have training groups in Europe, year-long training groups, and they all, or many people from those groups go to other parts of the world to training groups. So in that training year, you can go anywhere that I'm doing the training, anywhere in the world, which is really important because I think that, to me, one of the exciting things about this living process work is it's not culture bound. That people can be doing deep process work in German. It doesn't matter if you don't understand a word they're saying. It doesn't matter at all. Or in Swahili, as far as I know. But it's another thing to answer this question back here is that one of our most brilliant process facilitators is a young man who's dyslexic and who barely got through high school because of his dyslexia, who's an artist and a carpenter. And he's one of the best process facilitators. Most therapists, we have to untrain them to be good facilitators. Yes? Well, I don't separate, what did I choose? How did I choose, or what inspired me to go, what you're calling the spiritual group, or away from mental health, would you say? That? The institutionalized religion. You know, I believe that everything we do is spiritual. I do not separate the spiritual from life. You know, one of the women who's been in the spirituality group with me quotes, she's a very proper lady, but she always quotes me as saying, when I'm taking a crap, I'm spiritual, you know? Everything I'm doing is spiritual. I mean, I cannot separate the spiritual from my life. I love what Jackie Small says. You know, she says, we are not human beings trying to be spiritual. We are spiritual beings trying to be human. And that's always been a big part of my life. I know that I was really codependent with religion for many years. That I really believed that I could help the church be the church. You know, and of course that's my version of what it should be. But I got exhausted, and I realized that it was really unhealthy for me because the church is one of the designers of the addictive system. And the role of the church, when you read knowledgeable history of science people, which I'm not one, but I recently have been reading them, and the role of the church in the adoption of the mechanistic, empirical scientific worldview is terrifying. It's just terrifying to read. And so what I've found is that I follow my spirituality wherever it takes me. And I have found a kind of holistic spirituality in Native people that we have lost in Western culture. I have an absolute disgust for people who try to adopt Native American ways, for example, and do it in a Western way. You know, like, this vision quest stuff, you know, that people pay $300 and they're going to do a vision quest. I mean, that hurts me. Well, I was just recently in California, the woman who picked me up, she said, "Oh, I'm so glad you're so interested in Native spirituality. I just bought a pipe." And, You know, I mean, I just die with that kind of stuff. Or this one woman who went on a vision quest and wrote to me, and or actually what she did was she recorded all of her learnings and stuff, and she said, "Oh, today I saw a wild columbine, and it was facing toward the west, and the west is," and then she interpreted it, all this interpretation, and then one flower is headed toward the east, and heading toward the east means this and that and this and that. And I thought, oh, you know, every Native American I know would die with that, you know, because it comes from something deeper. And again, it's trying to transform without facing the addictive process. It's like trying to adopt a fix, but without really knowing what it means to be an Aboriginal that has absolutely no difference from being the earth, you know? And so I don't seek this out, really. What I do is I trust that what I'm doing is really guided, and that it's only my job to see the doors and walk through. You know that old thing in the New Testament, behold, I stand at the door and knock? I believe our addictions, we don't hear the knock, and we don't even see that there's a door there. We may not even see there's a wall there. We may walk right into it, you know? But I know that my work is to deal with my own addictive process and to do my own healing enough so that I hear the knock and I see the door. And then I make the choice of whether to walk through or not. But I really choose to try to do what's right for me, what I need to do. And whenever I do that, I'm okay. And I never know what that's going to be. And it may be spending more and more time with these people. It seems to be that that's what's happening in my life right now. And so I assume that that's what I need to be doing. And I don't know what that's about yet, but I will know if I go ahead and do it. So I'm here to find out why I'm here. Yes?
I find a major contradiction in Freud and, in psychology and psychiatry, and, in the psychological paradigm. And that for some reason, when I first started looking at it, it seems like it had a lot of real impetus towards a real spirituality, because when you emphasize catharsis, which is a major part of Freud, and surrender, and totally letting go of your ego defenses, it's very much a spiritual thing of surrender, and catharsis to me is very much the way, at this point, I see what the religious process power comes from, the power of really letting go of the control. And in a way, I'm wondering if what you're saying is that the whole psychological paradigm is really off base because it comes from a scientific worldview, a mechanistic worldview, or whether you're saying that it's not that the paradigm is off base, but that the people who practice it, because of the conditioning they're coming from in a scientific society, really distorts it because they're into a society that emphasizes assertion, self-assertion, emphasizes control, emphasizes. And in a way, I see the contradiction in Freud himself.
Can you hear him? I sure don't want to have to repeat this question.
Oh, wow. Sorry.
Go ahead.
In a way, I see the contradiction in Freud himself, because the strong ego is, self-assertion and control, but healing comes from catharsis, according to Freud, to a certain extent. And what I'm basically asking is, do you think the whole paradigm has to be thrown out, or do you think it's the way people practice it is the problem?
Or do you think it's the way people practice it? And I would say yes. Another question?
Have you worked with educational organizations or schools, and can you apply what you're talking about to that system?
Yes, we've worked some with educators. We right now have a contract with a major school system that is going to try to make the entire system healthy. The superintendent is coming to an intensive this summer, and we've been working specifically with one school that was in crisis, and we're starting to now work with the whole system. It's in Chicago area.
And what would education look like if it were a living process?
Girdle. You're asking me a girdle question. I don't know what it would look like. It might look different in 6 different school systems, because it would be facilitating the process of that system into becoming a place that would be healthy and alive for the people in that system. You see how fix-oriented we are? We're such good kids in this addictive system. Tell me how to do it. Tell me what it looks like, and I'll try. You know? And we're scared shitless of living it. You know, this work is, Chris used the idiom, and I use it all the time. It's flying by the seat of our pants. You know, that's one of the things I love about Hawaii. You know, my friends from the mainland come to Hawaii, and they say, well, you know, they arrive on Sunday, and they'll say, well, you want to go swimming? You want to go to the beach with me on Tuesday? And I say, I don't know. You know, why don't we wait till Tuesday? Because Tuesday may be pouring rain. Well, I don't want to go to the beach on Tuesday if it's pouring rain, you know. But and then I'll do the same thing with my writing. I'll go to bed at night, and I'll say, oh, I got to get going on this book tomorrow. I'm going to get up tomorrow morning, and I'm going to write. Well, I get up tomorrow morning, and the sun is shining. It is a clear, beautiful day. We can't do anything but go to the beach or go fishing. You know, I mean, it's just like, that's what you need to do that day. Wait for a rainy day to write, you know. So it's like learning how to live in process. And once we decide what an organization should look like, then we are going to be destructive in some way or another trying to get there. And we do the same thing with ourselves. But as we live it, and each step try to be as congruous and honest and clear as we're capable of being, we will create things that we never imagined. Now, that doesn't mean we can't plan. You know, we have to plan long-range planning, strategic planning, all that stuff. But we can only plan knowing that it's an exercise. You know? I mean, anybody who thinks, any company that thinks they can determine what they're going to be doing 20 years from now, look at digital. Look at any company that thinks that. You know, any American corporation that believes that's nuts, because they have gone through a revolution in the last year or so, most major multinational corporations, that they never would have believed. So, you know, we just, it's like I think it's our fear, our addiction, our illusion of control that says we have to know where we're going, what it's going to look like, and how we get there. You know, most institutions now with their therapists, you have to present a treatment plan. You have to know what your goals are. They have to be clear, doable, empirical, behaviorally based, you know. And then if you don't get there, you're a failure.
And you got to do it in 12 steps?
Yes. And treatment centers, they've got to get through the 5th step in a month. Well, you know, I've known people who've worked on step 1 for over 2 years, you know. But what happens is then you start lying. Because the person's not ready for it, you're not ready for it, that's not where it is, it's not what's therapeutic, but you start lying. It's the same thing that's happening in medicine right now with all of these rules that you have to follow to. I can remember when I had my appendix out a couple of years ago, and I was gangrene, for God's sake. You know, but the doctor, he'd been up operating all night, the surgeon. Magoon was his last name. What was his first name? It was like, he had the most unbelievable name. He looked just like little Abner. He had these great big hands. And I looked at, his name was something like Foster McGloon or something like that. I said, oh God, I never would have chosen you out of a phone book. You know? But go ahead. And but he forgot to phone in and say that he was going to remove my appendix. So then he was in this battle with my insurance company. And I said, what's going on? And he said, he said, this is the dumbest thing. He said, for God's sakes, your appendix was gangrene when I took it out. But he said, they don't care. I didn't phone in ahead of time and get clearance. Your white count was off the wall. And he said, now they're giving me trouble. He's got and he was mumbling down the hall. He won. But he very well might not have. I might have had to just pay it out of pocket. Now, when this is getting tighter and tighter, what I think we're seeing, remember, those of you, see, I went to seminary, so that's part of it too. I went to Union Theological Seminary. Remember before Jesus came on this planet? Huh? We were there. Well, remember this, because remember, one of the things that was happening in Jewish culture was the Sanhedrin was generating rules and laws and regulations by the thousands. And it had gotten to a point, the one that I remember the best, was that on the Sabbath it was illegal to take more than 10 or 11 steps outside the city limits. Wasn't that? That's how specific it had become. And then one of the things that was in the message, I think, of Jesus was the Spirit, not the law. Well, we have seen historically every culture that's about to collapse starts making more and more and more rules. Specific, more detailed, etc. This is happening in the helping professions at a rate which is unbelievable right now. There is no helping profession that isn't generating rules, licensing, laws, committees. I think what we're seeing is the death throes of a system. Yes, Ken.
You used the word helping profession, and I've been taught for many years that I am a practitioner of health care. My personal consideration is that is a terrible misnomer. I think we do ourselves a great deal of dishonor by talking about that. I feel that I've been a disease care professional or a medical professional. I wonder, in your opinion, what you think this, what I call misapplication of words, might be to us.
Well, see, I think in some ways it's exactly naming, like the helping professions. That's a codependent word, a codependent label. And that's kind of the general rubric. Another thing that I noticed, even when you were talking, Chris, talking about a medical problem, and this woman saying that, one of the saddest things that happened to me in the last few years is when I was in Russia speaking at a conference on addictions, and there were two of us who were women on the entire conference, which that disturbed me tremendously. And I was so hopeful about the other woman because she was a recovery addict, a psychiatrist, head of an alcohol and drug treatment center in a large hospital, pretty well known. And I was real eager for her to make an input into that group about her own 12-step program, because everything had been brain physiology and, just on and on and on and on stuff. And I felt like they really weren't dealing with the process of addiction. And so I was so eager to support her talk and hear it. And I started getting a headache as I listened to her. Well, it's always a clue, And what I realized is that my eagerness to support her was not letting me hear what she was saying. And what she was saying is that everybody either had a psychiatric or a medical problem. And I started calling it the medico-centric view of the world. There was nobody who had a health problem, a physical problem, a psychological problem, a spiritual problem. Everybody either had a psychiatric or a medical problem, and it was defined in those terms. And we've talked about this, and Chris has talked about the weight on doctors, that they have to to give releases and for everything. You know, if a person needs a day off, your doctor has to decide that you're sick, you know. And it's been the doctors have put themselves in that position of being the authorities on everything, you know. And I think that part of what you're talking about is the basic lying that we find in the professions. You're not in health care. You're in sick care. You're right. You know, let me give you an example. There's a woman I know who's a psychiatrist in Illinois brought charges against the OB/GYNs in the state for practicing without a license. And the reason she did is because she said they were trained in abnormal births and that they had no training in normal delivery, and therefore they were practicing without a license. But you know, this is what I think we're dealing with is the basic dishonesty that we've had, and part of it has been we don't know it. You know, as a therapist, I wanted to do well. I wanted to help. I really, really wanted to help people heal, and it's been so hard for me to see that what I was trained in makes that impossible. I can give them some fixes, they'll get a little better, but they're not really going to heal in that paradigm. That I am supporting a worldview that will destroy them, and they're so much before their bodies. So, I'm changing. Yes?
Okay, the question is, how does living in process feel different from those living out in society, So I want to give you an example from my first intensive. I walked in, and there was a woman there who was the sister of a holistic doctor that I know well. And I gave her a hug, or she gave me a hug, and she said, "Oh, I'm so glad to meet you." And I was glad to meet her because she was a favorite sister of this guy who's my friend who's the doctor. And I had heard that she had taken the year off to live in process. That's the only conversation we had. Next day, Anne comes in and we're sitting around checking in. And she says that she's angry with me. She's being totally honest. That's her job. On her check-in, she's angry with me. I am completely shocked, but the beauty of this is you're with people for 10 days and your only job is to stay in touch with yourself and to tell the truth. Well, let me tell you, after about 4 days, that gets very relaxing. You don't have to keep any shit from anybody because you come back to the group to deal with it. Well, as it turned out, this woman was a romance addict and also lesbian, and she told in the group as the days went on that she had had a fantasy about me going into the intensive, that we might become lovers while I was there because her brother liked me. And it was the damnedest thing that I'd ever walked in on, but we had this chance to process that because that came out. Then I knew why she was angry also. I'm kind of checking myself out for ticks. God, what have I done? Why is she angry with me? Well, then what you realize is that kind of stuff happens all the time, but because no one's honest, you don't even know what's going down. What I do in my disease is I run a projector. If my husband doesn't talk to me on a certain day, I run a projector. I have a whole scenario going about what it is. And unless, usually by Friday comes around and I've got myself divorced, living in a motel, I get this whole scene going until we finally get together to talk, And I find out that him not talking has absolutely nothing to do with me and had to do with something with his brother. Well, living in process, when all you have to do is tell the truth, becomes, let me give you another example of what happened. This woman was talking to me out on the patio. I call the place that we went Snake Pit Ranch. I mean, it was the weirdest place. They had this dog that kept throwing rocks in the pool, and then, of course, all of your own interpretations come up, all of your own limitations about, oh my God, I'm going to have to be in this place, and there's one bathroom for 30 women, and God, by 3 days, you couldn't care less. And that's a wonderful thing. You realize that when you live in intimacy and you tell the truth, all this other stuff doesn't matter, and that's really nice. Well, this woman was talking to me, and I realized I was just real uncomfortable talking to her. Now, at a cocktail party, I would probably stand there and talk to her until, I could escape. I'd figure out an escape route. But at a process, you can say, God, I'm uncomfortable with this conversation, and walk away. And it's her job to check out what's going on with her. And it's my job to check out what's going on with me. And then when the group gets together again, you can process this. And it's just wonderful. By about day 7, I could stare straight ahead for hours. And I felt like I was 2 years old, and that I had reclaimed a part of myself that got left behind so long ago, to just slow down, slow down, slow down. If you didn't want to go to the meetings, you didn't have to. If you wanted to sleep, you slept. And then also you got to deal with, if you were tired and you came to the meetings, why did you come to the meetings? No one's telling you what to do ever. And so when no one's telling you what to do ever, you get to really check out how sick you are, because you're creating all of this crisis. It's a really wonderful experience. Wonderful. And I'm thinking that, it's funny, I feel like I'm where Anne was when she said 2 years before she knew she had to stop practicing. It took her 2 years to get there. I feel about at that place, because I'm so aware of how even what I do, even after starting Women to Women, even though we try to run the office like an AA meeting, even though we live in process, even though all of what we do is what we do, the system of medical care, the paradigm through which people come to us is so sick. It is so sick that to participate on any level seems to suck you back in, and I'm not sure there's a way to do it non-addictively. I don't think I can stay clean continuing to participate.
Sharon? Susan, you want to say something about intensive? Now this is a Rolfer here who was a Jewish princess when she first came to an intensive. She's a recovering Jewish princess, yeah? Blushing, recovering.
Oh, it's so embarrassing to be in the real world. I just want to say about my first intensive with Anne. That was almost 2 years ago this coming August. And I sat in a room, and all the chairs were around in a big circle, and everybody was checking in, and I'm thinking to myself, God, these people are so sick. Because they're all going, oh, hi, my name is Joe, and I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict and a sex addict and all these things. So when the room finally comes around to me, and there was like a split between me and this other person, and I was thinking, like, what am I going to say? And then Anne said, well, there's some people in the center of the room. Can we get to them? So I was like, oh, God, And then the man right before me was an admitted rapist. And it really pushed my buttons because I was raped.
200 women? 200 women?
It was like countless women in Southern California, and it just pushed my buttons completely. But I chose, like a good girl, to ignore what was going on with me, and just say, well, my name is Sharon, and I'm not really sure why I'm here, and I feel healthy, and I'm spiritual, and my life works, and I love my work. I'm not a workaholic. And then I kind of thought, oh, wait a minute, my boyfriend's an alcoholic. And everybody was like on the edge of their seat, ready to laugh. And they were really good in that, well, some of them did and some of them didn't. But I began to see as the intensive unfolded that I was there because I needed to be there. That there's a reason why I had an active addict in my life. And I just couldn't see beyond like 3 inches in front of my nose. And then the next day, and so it was still kind of bubbling, so the next day I come in, because the intensive started around dinner time. The next day I come in, and I had so much rage towards that rapist that I couldn't even, like people almost had to hold me back. I was just screaming and yelling. And it was just, thank goodness there were people there who really are supportive and give you a safe place, because I was taking out all my stuff on this guy, and he had nothing to do with me, and I had nothing to do with him. But he had this hook called, I am a rapist, and I just flung myself on that hook and blamed my entire misery on this man I'd never even met. And then it just went on and on and on, and finally 8 days later I left the intensive and just knew that I'd found a place where I could really go to heal, because I'd always seen myself as a bit of a smart rat. Like therapists always told me I was done with therapy, and like everybody was always saying, well, you're fine, and yet I knew deep inside that there was a lot of shit going on over here. So I'm just thankful to Anne because she stuck with me. And I just...
He was awful. He was really awful.
But so I just think the work is great, and I think everyone here, just really be open to it and give yourself the honor and the opportunity to put yourself in a safe space to find out what's going on.
Yes. Well, she's talking about people saying living in the real world. I don't distinguish between process living in the real world. I think it's possible to be in this world in a process way. I live, I'm in the whole world a lot. And people I know are too. The issue is, to me, something that the 12-step program says is very helpful to me, and that is, the one question that I have to ask in life is, will this affect my sobriety? About everything I choose to do. And if it will destroy my sobriety, and I equate my sobriety, my living in process, and my spirituality. And if it will, then I can't do it. And it may mean the mortgage, it may mean my husband, it may mean whatever, my work. But the question is, can I stay sober, in tune with my spirituality, living out of my spirituality, and living my life, and do this? If I can't, I have to take a look at that. And it's very simple. It's not always easy, but it's very, very simple. And what we do is we get our minds going, and the mortgage, and the kids need to go to this school, and we need to do this, and we need to do that. What I've found is the best parenting I have done is living my own process. And I have 2 kids that are living theirs. And we have an unbelievably intimate relationship and close, and we respect each other's process. And I know that I modeled that for my kids, and that's the best thing I ever did for them. So I think sometimes we get screwed up on what we think is important, in an addictive system. But I know that as long as I say my spirituality, my sobriety, my living my own process is the most important thing, then my kids learn that that's the most important thing for them too. And it's not self-centered. It's not self-centered, because what I see is people who are living their process are more involved in and giving and caring of the world than do-gooders. I think we need to stop. Thank you all very much for coming.